The well-being of indigenous people and the earth was disrupted by Western colonizers. They used brutal and inhumane efforts that separated indigenous people from their culture, their history, and language, separated them from the land, and imposed economic practices that have proven to be so much less equitable and sustainable.
One of the most pivotal movements that pushed us to where we're at was the implementation around early 1900, 1910, 1915, was the federal government, along with the help with different churches, different denominations, came to our reservation with the sole mission to educate our children in Western settler colonial education in English. That was a moment in our history that has impacted us and is still impacting us now.
Today we're reeling from hundreds of years of children being taken away. So the boarding school era, the federal government established boarding schools where children were, rations were withheld from people if they wouldn't give up their children. In the 1950s, the transracial adoption program was created by the federal government, and hundreds of children removed, and then the government trained the states how to do that, and so thousands of children were removed from their families. No due process, no court hearings, just the government coming in, taking away children. Today, we still have the worst disproportionality in foster care placement. 17% of the children in Alaska are Native Alaskan, or Alaska Native, and 60% of the children in the foster care system up there are Alaska Native.
At one time, in 1800, we had 60 million plus buffalo in the Great Plains area. They were vast, they were abundant, and they were the lifeblood for the people that lived in this part of the world. Through very specific policies, there was an intentional effort by the government to wipe out the buffalo. The reason was buffalo were everything to us. People understood that if the buffalo were taken away, that our ability to be self-sufficient would no longer exist, and we would be forced to come on to reservations and be forced to be reliant upon the government. And what happened is that by 1900, there were less than 1,000 free-roaming buffalo. We went from 60 million plus to less than 1,000 in 100 years.
Indigenous people own 5% of this country's land base. Globally, indigenous people own 28% of the Earth's land surface. The amount of resources, and 80% of the biodiversity is on our land. We should be the richest people around by economic law. So what is this if it's not the fact that our assets are taken, converted into cash for them, or the benefit of the asset is derived and directed to them? We might still own the Colorado River, but they've diverted the water.
Prior to the Civil War, Mississippi was the richest state in the Union. It was the richest on the base of slave labor. Cotton was still king, right? At that particular period in time, on a global scale, not just within the United States, but on a global scale. All this was very much tied to this kind of triangular trade. And because of the value of the human bodies that they possess and the products that they were producing, it was the richest state by far. Those terms of those relations, the unequal nature of the relation between who owns, who doesn't own, right? Who can be represented, who's not represented. That still remains in place in Mississippi. And it's that backdrop that we are, now some 100 years, 150 something years later, still chipping away at and trying to undermine and eradicate. That is what our program fundamentally is based upon and what we're trying to accomplish.
Unfortunately, we live in an anti-Black, white supremacist, capitalist country, so that any efforts, especially by subaltern people like African Americans, to take charge of their own economics, to create some economic democracy and some wealth on their own is frowned upon. Yes. Because basically white supremacists are making money off of exploiting Blacks. So throughout the history between the mutual aid societies and the actual co-ops, right, blacks are trying to get out from under that exploitation, whether it's through job or whether it's through, you know, buying from businesses, buying supplies or whatever. So when blacks started doing this stuff and succeeding, the white folks not having it. So that, you know, so the what I call the sabotage really runs the range of just, you know, underpricing them to, you know, underpricing the blacks so they have to go out of business, not letting the white banks lend them money, the railroads not taking their produce, you know, so lower level sabotage, insurance companies not insuring, but then they also went as far as lynching, burning down the co-ops, lynching. In fact, you know, I looked at some of the lynching data that somebody like Ida B. Wells put together, and she was one of the ones who actually said that most lynching was about economics, not about sex. Most of the blacks were male business people who were making, you know, who were landowners or business owners trying to stop independent black economic activity. And so they would burn down the buildings, lynch people, hound people. So I have examples of even massacres.
We self-organize ourselves around what we care about. Wall Street firms, capital-centric firms, are organized around capital. They're organized around the notion that financial wealth is the highest good and more is always better when it comes to financial wealth. And so let's organize our economy around this principle. But in the emerging economy, it's called the new economy. I call it the generative economy, which means that it's life-serving. We have to reorganize ourselves around life. Community life, family life, employees, we need to be focused on employee well-being, we need to focus on ecological well-being.
The whole economic system doesn't work for Indigenous people. When you see the world holistically and you see your job as living in balance and harmony, these are fundamental design principles of an Indigenous economy versus the kind of competition and maximum yield principles that you're looking at that are structured into the existing. And so in Western economy, you get money if you need money, which is why a bank loans to rich people, but not to poor people, because what's rewarded is the accumulation. The system is designed to reward accumulation, so if you already have it, you get more.
Western colonizer society is very much individualism and individual wealth accumulation and individual asset accumulation and what's best for me. It's something that's so foreign because it's not rooted in anything that's in our value system.
We have fundamentally forgotten that we are living beings on a living earth in a living universe. That we need to learn to live with earth. We have, in our pursuit of money, we've actually created an economy that works in opposition to life, trying to suppress nature, control nature, exploit nature in order to make money. Which leaves us in a position of a serious question: is there intelligent life on Earth?
I already knew that the economic models we were looking at carried their own values and that our values were different and that culture was our strength, not our weakness. Because this was back in the days where everybody knew Indians couldn't do business because we shared too much and we cooperated. It seemed to me like those were good things and that businesses could be successful by sharing and cooperating. It's not that Indian people can't do business. It's they don't value profit over community. They don't value profit over life. So we were never going to succeed by their metrics because a tree only has value once it's cut down and it's board feet on the market. And so if you care about trees, you can't succeed in that economy.
It was always about the greater good. It was always about what's best for the whole nation, what's best for the earth, and not what's best for the individual.
The foundation of our school is Wotakuye. That's our kinship system. And all of our kids here, we refer to each other by relative terms. That means that we're good to each other, we look out for each other, and we take care of each other. And every day that we remind them that, but that isn't just us It's everything. We take care of the earth, we take care of the plants, the animals, and our things that we have because they come from the earth.
Our relationship is with the land and with plants and animal relatives, knowing that we aren't, above them. We are kind of on the same level as them, that we're all sharing this one earth. And so we're all connected in that way, whether, it's a stranger on the street or, an ant crawling on the ground, we're all connected.
When we merged, through a series of events, some of us became human and some of us became buffalo. And so when we talk about buffalo, when we talk about Khatkanka, we're really talking about our relatives, our other selves, because we come from the same root. We come from the same ancestor. And so there really is no difference between Lakota people and buffalo people.
African American mutual aid started pretty much on the boats. When we were dragged here forcibly in chains, we were helping each other, even though on the boats we were, the captors wouldn't even let people who spoke the same language or who were from the same community be chained together. So, I mean, that kind of mutual aid and camaraderie is really incredible when you think about it, because you had people who weren't from the same culture, they weren't from the same religion, they didn't even have the same language, but they still were helping figure out how to support each other, whether it was supporting a whole group to jump overboard, whether it was supporting a group to have a resurrection, or whether just surviving the trip over here. So from then, we had this sense, I think probably from the way that African cultures had also had a sense of mutuality and communalism, and then we practiced it wherever we could.
Which I think still remains the cornerstone, like I know of my thinking anyway, and that was W.E. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in America. And it outlines in a number of different ways, the importance of the solidarity economy and cooperative economics, and particularly Black folks in the South having, under those conditions, in terms of duress, having to pull our collective resources together to be able to survive and to be able to control our own labor.
So our 7-gen vision really started off with the idea of what kind of world we want to see in the next 7 generations.
For us, the process is really simple, is act in the best interests of your great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren. It is make moral and ethical decisions that place the good of the group above the good of the individual. And finally, it's make decisions using complex decision models.
Our greatest threat right now is social inequality and climate change. And so what do we need to be doing differently in order to make sure we have a vibrant and thriving world for the next 7 generations? And we've kind of talked about generations being about 25 to 30 years, and so we're having to think 175 years into the future. I think for us, we're thinking about, what does energy look like for us? What does our housing look like? What does education look like? Where are we getting our food from?
We all were born in Africa, in the same place. We're either all brothers and sisters or cousins or something, and we're part of one family.
Our unhoused relatives don't need more policing, right? We don't need for the city and for the police to criminalize poverty. We need connection. We need relationality. We need those relationships. We need to be a community and take care of each other.
The Tampa Bay area, Hillsborough County in particular, was really the epicenter of the second wave of, hardcore homophobic organizing. It was a group called the American Family Association. So when we took it on in Tampa and in Hillsborough County, there were a lot of other places around the state that wanted to kind of learn the lessons, be prepared for what their talking points were, what were going to be their tactics and strategies. And it had made national news. You can see how far Tampa's come. Now it has an out lesbian police chief, but that definitely was not the case back then.
I was the project director for the Law and Standards, and we produced the Missouri report. So what happened then is, armed with that study, The Missouri public defenders, God bless their souls, stood up to those judges. He says, I need relief for 16 public defenders pursuant to that methodology. Thank God he found a judge that was about to retire. And the judge says, you're right, that those 16 public defenders are violating the law, violating their ethical obligations under the law. Don't do that anymore. It's a caseload standard now that has been validated in the courts as a result of the case that arose out of St. Louis County.
I was checking the numbers on that office's wait list recently and saw that it was gone. And I called the attorney who runs the office and I said, where's your wait list? I can't find it. It's not in the database. And she said, well, we don't have it anymore. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have it? How did you do that? She said, you gave me 2 more attorneys. That's how I did it.
We did a flow of funds studies, and we saw that less than 7 cents on the dollar actually stayed in Pine Ridge, with 93 cents on the dollar going to the border town economy. That really sparked, at that moment, in that economic development tribal college conference, they began talking about some kind of lending mechanism. They wanted to do a lending program so they could capture their own economy and begin holding some of that economy and have the turnover, get at least a one-time turnover of the dollar on the reservation, which really and truly is the story behind the Lakota Fund. We didn't have the name microlending. We didn't even know what kind of loan fund we were actually going to do, but I heard that loud and clear. There's another Indian man that was getting his master's degree in economic development, and I started talking to him, and he created this informal sector study, and he went out and basically the question was, what do you do to make money? And he began looking at 83% of the households earned about 87% of their income from these informal activities. They made coffins for the cemetery. They welded crosses for the cemetery. They mended fences. They did hair. They babysat. They sold lunches to the Indian Health Service or the Bureau of Indian Affairs people. There was 118 vibrant activities that were being done every day to make money. And I was like, that's it. That's it. That's what we want to lend to. This is it. And it was just all there, all of it in front of us, all this creativity, entrepreneurship.
And Lakota Funds was the first one to achieve that status then of becoming a certified native CDFI. And that's all about, access to credit and the asset building work that needs to be done in these underserved communities. And of course, the Native communities are, among those. There's a lot of that underground cash economy that still exists. And that's partly because of the fact that until Lakota Federal Credit Union was chartered, there was not a single bank, a federally insured financial institution depository on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And I thought a credit union is different enough than a bank, because it is member owned and not to make some bank board members, owners wealthy. It's for the benefit of those own people, those own account holders.
Indigenous groups who were at the end of 2016, 2017, fighting in Standing Rock against oil pipelines that were encroaching on indigenous lands, that were destroying the earth, poisoning the water. So in solidarity with what we were witnessing, activists in cities like Seattle and Los Angeles expanded the front lines and took the fight to our local governments and said, by virtue of these banks who are financing these oil pipelines, banking with our city, we were, in essence, funding the destruction of communities and the planet. And the only true solution was to divest from Wall Street altogether by creating a bank that was owned by the people, accountable, transparent, with socially and environmentally responsible mandates. Okay, so a public bank is a financial institution that is owned by a local government, a city, a region, or a state. And the deposit base for a public bank are the taxes, the fees, the fines, the funds, the revenue that our city accrues, which then leverages to create loans, just like any other bank. But the difference between a public bank and a private bank is, with a public bank, the interest and profit belongs to the community. So rather than it gets siphoned out of state by private Wall Street bankers and private shareholders, that money stays here. and gets recirculated back into our local communities so that we can fund things that we need: affordable housing, solutions to homelessness, a Green New Deal for Los Angeles.
We are a national Native-led nonprofit, and so, we are running 7 different programs. The direct service provision would be where we are providing seed funding for children's savings accounts. We know that by providing a $100 opening account deposit, this is not going to pay for college, but if families are able to put a little bit of money in, some are putting in $5, $10 a month, some maybe at birthday or at a special holiday. And then if you can cobble that together with other outside scholarships, we're trying to start the youth when they're younger with opening the accounts, and then help their families to think that it can be an option to go to school, and the kids too. So it's kind of about changing the expectations and trying to build in more hope there. To our knowledge, are the largest seed-funded Native Children's Savings Account program for youth, Native youth in the country.
Capitalism just allows a few people to make it. Everybody else gets left behind. Then we need a strategy like cooperative ownership, because there you have broad ownership, you have community wealth.
Once an employee becomes an employee owner, which is a 1-year eligibility period, and then he or she is voted upon by the existing worker owners, they immediately begin to build equity in the company. They're immediately fully vested for profit sharing.
The initiative started in 2018. The fund was created, and the backbone of the fund was defined to basically acquire small businesses in the community, convert them to employee ownership, and support them in the evergreen network of other cooperatives. It really takes till the point of profit sharing for it to sink in, like, wow, this is real. Wow, I'm electing my own coworkers to the board of directors. These trucks I'm driving around in to put insulation in or do a home energy audit, they're mine.
We have our Green Team Cooperative. What its primary mission is just landscaping, in the community. And then the other one primarily is the Community Production Center. It's a light-scale manufacturing that's based upon digital fabrication. What most people understand is 3D printing.
Kodiak Electric is a cooperative, and we're owned by what we call the members. So when you have a service or meter with Kodiak Electric, you are a owner of the company. The benefit is that any profits that are made by the company are redistributed to the owners as capital credits or dividends, I suppose you could call it. This year is projected to be a 99% renewable energy. Wind and water.
The Farm to College program is one of the first in the country. 93% of the food that we served was through a wholesaler from anywhere in the world. Now we're purchasing over 20% of our food on a $3 million budget, local being defined as the state of Montana. One of the purposes of our program was to strengthen the agricultural economic development in the state of Montana. Of course, the volume that we go through, I couldn't have my food buyers call 30 farmers to get 300 pounds of tomatoes. And so this co-op started, and it's been fantastic. I mean, that one call, and we can get all of the items that we need. And they also then began selling to the local restaurants, and now they have a very viable business enterprise that helps the farmers.
So Divine Chocolate is a chocolate company that delivers fantastic chocolates. It's delicious. But what's special about it is that the cocoa farmers in Ghana co-own the business. And so they own 33% of the company here in America. They have seats on the board of the company. They have a say in how the company is run, and they ultimately get a share of distributed profits. And so Quapo Cocoa was established in 1993 as a cooperative.
So the Buy Nothing Project is an international network of hyper-local gift economies that are based online. Right now, each of them exists online as a Facebook group. You go to Facebook and you look up your neighborhood name and find our Facebook group there and join it. Once you're approved into the group, you can offer things that are freely given with no strings attached at all. You can ask for things given that way from other people, and you can share your gratitude for things that you've received in the group. Right now we have, in one of our groups, we have 2 different people are putting together Buy Nothing weddings. So they're collecting up their dresses, decorations, glasses, silverware, plate. That's the kind of culture that I think is, to me, seems much more sustainable, and it's looking at human kindness as wealth and as what we're trying to build up in our groups, and not just stuff.
Our Exchange Portland is a group of people from our local community that have banded together, actually over 1,000 people now. And we each are willing to provide services or expertise in exchange for hours. For example, I would provide an hour of physical therapy treatment. There's a whole list of services that are local to the Exchange. We went sailing on the J&E Riggin one summer in Penobscot Bay for a week. We've had help with landscaping, massage therapy, and health care for my wife and for myself.
On our 34 acres, we have a regenerative community development. It's one of our 8 initiatives. Currently, we have 21 single-family homes, 7 are complete. Our broader goal for this community is to be net zero. We have 7 homeowners. All of them are first-generation homeowners. Not perpetuating these ideas of home ownership because it's asset accumulation for your family, or you can build equity and all of these things in a very westernized way, but really trying to tie it back to being caretakers of our homes. And what does that mean to plan for future generations? Because we always thought generationally. We want to raise the standard in building. We want to raise the standard in construction. We want to raise the standard in design. Like you'll notice, each of our 7 homes are in a circle with an opening to the east, because as Ocheti Shakonwi, that's how our camps used to traditionally camp. In those 7, the 7 council fires, that's how they camped, with the opening to the east. So we wanted to, in our design of our community, reflect those values and those practices of our people.
So CLT Plus One is a pilot project for DCLT, and it's the idea of combining CLT homes, so our traditional CLT home where the owner owns the home and we own the land, with an accessory dwelling unit. But our plan is to to construct new housing and an accessory dwelling on the same lot and sell them both. We would manage that rental property for the homeowner, but it would also provide some increased revenue and equity for the homeowner.
If you overlay the map of Evanston with a red line map and where the 5th Ward is, the boundaries are very similar to that of the red line map. And in their documentation, they deemed it less valuable because of the amount of Negroes that were in that location. And so because of that, banks won't loan, developers won't develop.
And we move forward with that as a foundation of our case for reparations. In November of 2019, we actually had our vote on Resolution 126R19, which was to establish reparations for the Black community in Evanston using the cannabis sales tax revenue. What today is a $25,000 direct benefit for housing equity that will build wealth immediately through equity.
So this arose from this tent camp community that started as a protest in a downtown parking lot in Olympia. And it was a protest against an anti-homeless ordinance that the city had passed. They had this idea of having tiny little houses and then a shared community building that would have a kitchen and showers and laundry facility, which is, in a sense, exactly what we've built. The big difference between being homeless on the street or in the woods, around here a lot of people are homeless in the woods, and being homeless in the camp is the difference between loneliness and community. So it was really interesting, for me at least, to learn that there are 2 fundamental human needs. One is housing, the other is community, and that they're equally important.
Regenerative agriculture is approaching food systems and food production from the point of longevity, of being able to be adaptable and not working against the land and nature, but actually being a part of it, working within it. So we can have the longest run of success, not just for ourselves who are producing food and implementing the food systems, but for the land itself, that the land is also being provided with benefits from our practices on the lands.
So we're here at Kewakbal Gardens, which is a 1-acre teaching and production farm. So we do a lot of mixed vegetable production. We do a lot of egg production as well. We have some hens out here. And our goal was originally to teach the community how to grow their own food. And so having to balance the needs of like people are hungry now, but also trying to create systems that are more sustainable and more future thinking. And so the way we do that is to increase local food access, is to increase the amount of tribal food producers. And so we've started a farmer training program, really geared at getting people ready to start their own food production.
Buffalo were everything to us. They were our economy. They were our source of food, shelter, clothing, spiritual items. The Woolakota Regenerative Buffalo Range is a 28,000 acre buffalo range that will be home to 1,500 animals. It will be the largest Native American owned and managed buffalo herd in the world.
The land that the Sisters of Providence have here in St. Mary of the Woods is 1,200 acres of property. Everything from certified forests to certified organic farmland to organically grown gardens, about 7 acres of gardens. We have pastures with alpaca, 47 head of alpaca here on the grounds.
We have a community-supported agriculture program. It's a different way of looking at agriculture where the people buy shares. So we all share the risk with the farmers, with the gardeners, so that doesn't make it difficult for someone to actually do that work.
I'll start with Freedom Farms. I think that's probably the one that's, one of the easier ones for folks to grasp. And its objective is to produce food sovereignty in our community. Trying to encourage as many people in the community to take those front, lawns in the backyards that they have, and we have a lot of them have a lot of space in Jackson, and say, hey, we can change our quality of life. 2 dimensions. One, producing a baseline of food for our membership, right, through our own internal community, CSA, supported agriculture model community. And the second is producing enough, of core commodities to go to market, so that there is some level of income exchange and bringing back a profit to be reinvested in seed and new materials and, upgrade of equipment, et cetera. Something that's in development is the People's Grocery that we're in the process of developing. That it will be one of the cornerstones of this whole food sovereignty program in West Jackson.
An urban farm is just any plot of land that's being used to its full extent for growing food. We are basically forming a coalition of urban farmers.
I'm selling to 3 different restaurants, and I'll be selling at the Coley Community Market for the first time this year.
Positive Indian Parenting is an 8-lesson curriculum. The first lesson is asked people to examine where they learn to parent. And if you learn to parent in boarding school, or if you learn to parent from people who were raised in boarding school, you didn't get a chance to learn the rich traditions that teach that children are sacred beings. The storytelling, the use of cradle boards, the nurturing practices, the lullabies. But it took us 2 years to research it, searching out elders across the United States and into Canada to learn these traditional practices. And we now have villages where there hasn't been a foster care placement outside the village in 5 years.
Our language is embedded with our lifeways and our spirituality. We have birth to 5 Montessori, total immersion Montessoris. We have a kindergarten through 1st grade total immersion classroom. We are designing a truly Lakota total immersion school.
The ultimate goal is to get our kids to be intermediate fluent in Lakota. We're going to speak our language, so that way we sustain our fluency. But we also start to take back our space. We start to take back our space that always had belonged to us.
So they're really taking what they've learned here about healthy eating habits, but also like cultural eating habits. And I'm hoping, you know, all of that together, we really become a healthy nation. Because we know the statistics of our chronic diseases, our mortality rates, the food apartheid. We know those stats. So how are we working with our kids to really change those? Because they're the future.
We still have to meet state standards to be qualified as a school. So testing-wise, they're in all of their things, reading, math, science, they're all testing at least one grade level ahead, which is amazing. But it all comes back to what they're learning.
My vision is that we're going to have a whole bunch of change makers, you know, coming about from the school as they see and learn from a different lens. Because growing up, I didn't see myself. I didn't see my people's history.
It was a real honor to design classes that were going to reflect the students within them and their history, the stories, their culture, their lived experiences now. And that's what we did. We did it through literature, we did it through social studies, we did it through art. And what ended up happening is the students found themselves. Educational outcomes went through the roof. Students were graduating, you know, in the high 90% from all of our high schools that we taught at.
The political economy in which we all live has already passed its end date. Signs of dysfunction are everywhere. And so another system is coming. Some kind of systemic transformation is in the offing. And the real question, I think, for those who genuinely care about others and care about the future, you know, our children or other people's children, future generations, is what kind of system should we transition to? George Mason University has a role to play in hastening the kind of systemic transition that will benefit everybody here, not just the elites. You know, one thing that we're very consciously focused on is not only partnering up with existing initiatives, but also seeing startups come out of the research that we're doing here, so that students, when they graduate and go back to their communities or to other parts of the region, they don't just go into business for themselves, they do it for each other and for the communities. They form cooperatives, they take a different approach than they might otherwise.
We're at a place right now where we're all trying to decide, okay, how does one person make a difference? How do I make a difference sitting in this little studio, wrapping trash upon trash and trying to say something about how frustrated I feel that my own people are throwing tons and tons and tons of trash away without real consideration about what this means in the future. Same way with the human beings. How do we justify that we are disregarding the needs of people like us everywhere? I don't know, but I really think that artists have a unique responsibility to look at things differently and processing very differently. And then through that processing, there's an articulation, whether it's tangible, whether it's a performance installation like we're doing in Washington, D.C., to look at things in a creative way that may have some really interesting answers.
During the course of the Music Box, when it was open to the public, this house also housed about 5 different instruments. So there was a bathtub bass behind you, there was a folding out from the wall. There's all sorts of interventions in this house that kind of made it a musical experience. This house was one of about 9 structures built by over 25 artists. And when we opened to the public, it was a kind of crazy thing. Sometimes we'd have 100 people in the yard at once, all running around and playing things.
If you want to change the system, we've got to democratize wealth. And if you want to do it in a way that's democratic, you start at the bottom, community by community by community. But that's not changing the system, that's laying groundwork. And one way I think about it is in the prehistory of the New Deal, the 30 years before the New Deal. There was experimentation at the state and local, they called it the laboratories of democracy. But when the right time came, the same principles that had been tested and refined and played with became principles that could be extended to national level or regional level. So, for instance, you've got labor law in that case, which was experimented with in a couple of states. Labor legislation, union legislation, what became Social Security. All that was experimented with first and then transferred to much larger level.
It ended up the whole microenterprise and community development loan fund movement took off across the country. CDFIs were the community development financial institutions that were all put together under that banner were like community credit unions, community banks, the micro loan funds we were doing, a lot of the housing lending, mortgage lending people in the low-income communities. So it was a range of different financial institutions that were gearing their operations to match the economy in the community where they were setting up. It was the first organized, systematic questioning of our financial systems and what were their purpose and what was their use if this was an entire group of people left out of the market. So as the Lakota Fund was up and making its loans, I was approached by a Wayne Silby and a John Guffey, and they were the founders of the Calvert Social Investment Fund. And this is about mid-90s, and they had heard about the Lakota Fund, and they were looking under their mutual fund umbrella at some way to work with poor people was their idea. I went on the board not knowing exactly how a mutual fund worked, and one of the things I would talk about at the first board meeting was poor people being credit worthy. And one of the things that they talked about was doing something like the Lakota Fund on a national scale, only getting the investors into it. I ended up, again, writing up the business plan for looking at taking 1% of our portfolio and investing it directly into the community development financial institutions. And we created this high social impact investment within our mutual fund. Then we decided to move it over to the foundation, the Calvert, which is now called Capital Strategies. Calvert Capital Strategies is a separate foundation. This was the only private sector vehicle for individual investors to invest in these kinds of community financial institutions. And we were able to get FDIC status of it insured, and it became a class of its own. It's community notes. So anybody can go to a broker or themselves just say, I want to invest in community notes.
What's most important is these incredible stories of resilience and revitalization and rebirth and reemergence. And I think that we can provide the solutions and a path forward for other communities across the globe to emulate in their own ways.